All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As we've done over the past couple of days, we're excited to share a final set of project talks with you. Have really found it valuable to get these perspectives on how Clowder is being used across all different disciplines and domains. So this next project talk will be coming from Praveen Kumar, based here at the University of Illinois, talking about the critical interface network. I'll just remind folks that while Praveen is giving his talk, you are welcome to leave questions in the chat for us to relay during the question and answer period following. And of course, at that point, you'll be welcome to unmute and ask your questions live as well. So thank you again. And without further ado, Praveen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity to present this little project we have on critical interface network for intensively manned landscapes. I'm going to talk about the science drivers behind the data. I think there is very little I can add to the data side as to what has been discussed over the last couple of days. And so hopefully I can provide a perspective on the kind of science that the Clowder project is able to support. So just to give you a background on this, I've been working with NCSA for over a decade or more. We have a nice history of collaboration with NCSA. I was a co-PI on a SEED project, lead PI on a geosemantics Earth Cube project, co-PI on the brown dog, and I led the Critical Zone Observatory, which is now in its 8th year, last year of it. And this CINET is a follow-on from the CZO project for another 5 years. We are in the first year of that project. So the CINET is very closely linked to the IML CZO, the Critical Zone Observatory project. And through the IML CZO, we have already collected a huge amount of data. So on the right, you see the numbers, over 5.5 terabytes of data. And our team at NCSA has been very kind to provide the interfaces and access to these data. The key story here is basically the heterogeneity of data. I mean, we are trying to understand the watershed from a very multidisciplinary perspective, including biogeochemistry, hydrology, geology, geomorphology, the human dimension, biogeochemistry. And as a result, I think there is all these data are in different formats. Some are live streamed from basically the field. Others are analyzed in the laboratory. Students go and collect grab samples and so forth. So I think the flexibility of Clowder has been a key piece of the story in us being able to manage our data in one space. So this is an example of what we have from IML CZO data in terms of the remote sensing. So you have the point cloud on the left top. You have the waveform LiDAR in the middle, which is basically a forest canopy here at the Allerton Forest. And these waveform LiDAR can penetrate through a tree. So what you see on the right-hand side is actually a tree in that forest seen from an airborne LiDAR. What you see on the left-hand bottom is basically hyperspectral imagery used to identify trees. Each circle is a tree, and then each color is a different species of a tree. So, and then we can create this vertical structure of trees from these data. So pretty sophisticated, nice data sets. This is an example from Avris airborne instrument converted into different soil properties. So this is soil texture at 7.5 meter resolution. The resolution is determined by the altitude at which the plane flies. So with the hyperspectral measurements and some grab samples on the same time as the flight, we can do some machine learning techniques to characterize a lot of these soil properties. Here you see a lot of the minerals that we can identify. So in this new project, the CINET, again, is an extension, I would say next phase in there. It's several partners are involved. So I'm essentially presenting on behalf of all our team members here at CINET, including our team at NCSA. So what you see in the yellow are basically the partner institutions, and in the white are the sites at which we will be doing our study. This Upper Sangamon site here is going to be our primary, where a lot of the studies will be done, and then the others will be more as a comparative study. So what is CINET? Basically, it's focusing on critical interfaces. And if you think about a watershed, you think about these transition areas. So near surface is a transition area, floodplain is a transition area. So those are critical interfaces, and they serve basically as areas for transmission of material and gaseous fluxes. They basically affect the connectivity and the contact duration for chemical reactions. They serve as hotspots. They amplify or attenuate signals, they create thresholds, and over a long term, they co-evolve. So our key hypothesis is basically these critical interfaces have a disproportionate impact on watershed functions, right? So this is just a high-level overview of what the science is trying to accomplish. So, but you can see, for example, hopefully you're seeing this video taken from a plane, and quite a bit of heterogeneity across the landscape in terms of the water. And so these are microtopographic depressions which hold water. They affect productivity on the landscape. So if there is a lot of water, it doesn't support the growth of the corn. This landscape has significant human impact on it through tillage, and depending on how this landscape is managed in terms of the corn, soybean, and how we measure fluxes. So this is a tower where we're measuring flux at the top of a 25-meter height and a 10-meter height and below ground. And looking at through this lens, we're trying to characterize what happens on our landscape in terms of transport of water, sediment, nutrients, organic carbon, and so forth. This landscape has been highly structured. This is an example of a tile drain. Hopefully you've seen the video where a lot of water is drained out, so it doesn't affect crop productivity, or rather it improves crop productivity. And we can get now very high resolution data. So on the lower left, you see an NDVI data from last year in this landscape. So the darker the green, the more vegetation there is. And a lot of nutrients is applied to the landscape. So we need to measure all these things. So because of the human impact, one of the critical interfaces is this reactive zone in the plant root system. So there is a history of evolution. So this land was basically prairie 150, 200 years ago, and it had certain vertical profiles of various chemicals. And now we have gone into an agriculture phase where the plant composition has been changed and the contribution from roots has changed. And as a result, it has modified the chemical composition vertically down, which then eventually impacts the stream chemistry, right? So basically when it rains, the rain moves through the soil system, picking up chemicals, impacting chemical reactions in the soil, and then moving into the stream system, either directly or through these tile drains. And so we're trying to also understand what happens in these root zone. So one of the things which we are doing is putting together sensors and basically measuring some of the gases that are coming out from this root zone, like CO2 and oxygen, and then we're measuring moisture, temperature, and conductivity. And so we're trying to design these experiments, and we're going to be deploying this now in the summer, and collecting a lot of these data and analyzing pore waters as well for cations, anions, dissolved organic carbon, alkalinity, and stable isotopes in there. Uh, so the reason I'm presenting this is to give you a flavor of the different types of data that we are trying to collect. And then as you move further up, we're trying to do this at a watershed scale. So this is a deployment that happened last week. We put in a pump here in this pipe to collect data from the Sangamon River, which goes into what we call a river lab. And this river lab has pretty sophisticated instrument. These instruments will generally reside in a laboratory, in a building, because of their high precision, but we are putting them out in the field, and hence this building-like structure is very important. It has air conditioning units and so forth to maintain an environment. And these are the various data sets that will start streaming through. Some of them already coming through, and then these will be available in 2 to 3 weeks, every 20 minutes. So this is going to be the first of its kind deployment. This is the fourth deployment in the world, first in the Americas, and we're getting a lot of these data for this study. And another aspect which we are trying to do for the downstream is basically looking at the cores in the soil to characterize what is the vertical structure of the soil. And so this is in the Allerton forest. This coring is happening now, as today and tomorrow. And the idea is that to look at history of deposition in this landscape and then infer what has moved through this watershed, because this floods periodically, and so it leaves the signature, and we can essentially characterize the vertical structure of the column and the composition. So these are some of the analysis that will be done with the cores that we are pulling together this week. And our hope essentially is that all this data then will feed into models. And so this is one example of just the hydrologic model without the biogeochemistry and so forth on a LiDAR resolution. So 1 meter resolution over very large areas, we can do simulations. And any variability you see is basically because of landscape variability. So you can see basically the tillage signatures in here, and the moisture variability is caused by this thing. So we're taking all this data and trying to make them available, consistent with NSF requirements. So basically, the Clowder framework ingests these data. Some of it becomes available through the geo dashboard, but this is the playground. This is the staging area that Kenton talked about at the beginning of this meeting. And then we have the possibility of sharing it in HydroShare. So Luigi and his team have developed protocols to move a lot of the data into HydroShare. So the MLCCO data is already there. We're going to be working with the protocols for the CINET data to move it into HydroShare. And so there's a lot of visualization associated with the geo dashboard in there, so we can pretty much see what is going on in almost real time, and taking advantage of the facilities that NCSA offers in staging this data across the network and provide longevity to this data set. So the challenges and needs that are addressed by Clowder is basically addressing the project organization, because we have several teams working in these aspects, and what is the access policy. So sometimes we'll limit access to data because students are working on their thesis, and we want to allow time for them to work on their thesis. Sometimes metadata is visible, so people can find what is there and contact the people to establish a collaborative relationship. And some of these data set is immediately open access or after 2 years, right? The big thing is this heterogeneity of data. I walked you through the whole CINET idea simply to illustrate that we are collecting a very, very wide variety of data. And to have a data system which will support, I think Clowder fits the bill and basically allows for working through standards and protocols, allows for version management, raw to curated and so forth. We are developing a data-driven alert system to enable real-time decision-making so that we know if some instruments has failed, we can attend to it immediately because these are very, very valuable data system. This is also supporting experimental design and planning, so we can think about what data is available where and what is the best place to deploy new instruments. I think what we want to be moving towards is machine learning and AI-driven extractors so that we can get more out of these data than just data sitting there. They should be telling us what's going on. So that probably is the next stage. And through API interfacing for modeling. Luigi today morning talked about DOI facility, and I think that's going to be important. And he also talked about potentially utilizing the seed extractors for publishing data. And so I think that would be another nice thing to have access to. So with that, I will stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So can you elaborate a bit on the version management need being addressed? So basically, when we get the raw data from the field, we preserve that without altering it, right? So sometimes they will have an instrument failure. There might be a bird poop on a sensor or whatever else that is going on. And we keep that data preserved. And then we run other quality control on that. And we may then do some gap filling in that. Students may analyze that and find maybe there are some biases in some of the instruments, so we correct for that. So the idea is basically to keep a provenance. So if we use nth version of the data in a publication and somebody wants to go back and say, hey, look, no, I think there is a different way that we should study this data or do quality control on it, they can have access to the raw data at whatever level. So our goal is to basically keep all those through provenance management, and I think Clowder offers that. So that was the key idea.
Does CINET have one instance of cloud-based version of Clowder where all the data that is being collected is being sent to for pre-processing?
I mean, we have one instance of Clowder where all the data is collected. The pre-processing is done by various groups. Just the heterogeneity of data basically takes it out of the realm of one person or two people being able to do pre-processing. I think that requires knowledge about the processes those data represent. It requires judgment calls. So a lot of these are being done by the different teams that are in there. So it's not one place where this is being done, but there is just one instance of Clowder where all the data resides. Maybe Luigi, you want to say something more on that?
Yeah, I think that captures it. Yeah, so there is an instance that we maintain at NCSA on the NCSA Nebula cluster, the current one, and for CINET, we'll be moving that to the NCSA Radiant cluster. And so all the data, as Praveen mentioned, all the raw data, derived data, everything is in that one instance that we make available to the world.